You're listening to Developmental, Property and the Mind podcast, where development industry insight meet mindset with Trafalgar CEO Joe Aboud. Join one of the property industry's most free thinkers as he explores the path to success and contentment.
Hi, I'm Joe Aboud and welcome to today's episode of Developmental. And today I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Professor Ed Blakely, an influential force in guiding governments all around the world on urban planning. He was the Director of Recovery for New Orleans post the Hurricane Katrina disaster, one of the world's or America's worst natural disasters, and a proud family man. Welcome, Professor Blakely.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for your time today. You know, in the short time that we have together, we've got so much ground to cover. I mean, you've done so much in your life, so many great achievements. Probably start by asking you about your story and kind of where you grew up and shed some light and a little bit of background on your life.
Let me give that to you in three pieces. You know, when you think of yourself as a little kid, the things that influence you most are the place you're in. And I grew up in a small desert town in Southern California. And this small desert town had some really good things about it. The greatest thing about it was my great-grandfather, who lived to be 107. And I knew him, and he's one of the greatest influences on my life. You know, the guy that teaches you how to fish and how to chase rabbits and how to shoot your gun first and how to live life. He was a great storyteller, and he influenced me when I went to school. And he told me a few things that I really kept with me when I went to school. The first one was there are kids in the school who are really smart, kids in school who are good athletes, and there are other kids in the school. You hang around with smart kids and be an athlete. And that's what I did.
Okay.
The second part of my life is really high school and college, where I was the athlete. And my life was shaped by being athletic, being on the all-star teams at every level, accomplishing a lot, getting Hall of Fame recognition for my playing American gridiron football. And then I thought, gee, there's no more to life after that. You know, what do you do when you put down that football? Take that jersey off. And I had to go in the military, compulsory service. This is just as Vietnam was starting out. So when I went into the military, I was an officer because I'd been to university. And when I got in the military, I discovered you have to really learn how to work with all kinds of people, not just the smart guys, not just the football players. And I happened to be in the military at the time of the Cuba crisis. And the guy who was with me and guided me through that, I was in intelligence, was a guy from Detroit, from the real ghetto. And he knew more about reading photography than anybody had ever met. And from then on, I said, it doesn't matter where you're from. It matters what you got in you.
Yeah, it's not where you're from, it's where you're at.
It's where you're at and what you got to give. And after that, I went through the military, went overseas for a short while, as one does, because I hadn't been overseas. When I came back, I got in the war on poverty and got a little recognition from that. And so I got a call to come down and talk to a guy in San Francisco, and he says, we'd like you to come to Washington. What do I want to go to Washington for? Well, meet some people. And so I go to Washington, and among the people I meet is the President of the United States. He says, would you like to come to work for me? This is Richard Milhous Nixon.
Wow.
So my third job in life was working for the President of the United States. Not any president, Richard Milhous Nixon. And the people around him were quite, well, there's a long story about them. But I liked the Secretary of State, who I was working for directly, and we had a lot of crises overseas. The president was going overseas and the like, and I helped handle some of those issues, and it really made me grow up. There's nothing tougher than the White House. There's no such thing as sleep. You've always got one thing on your mind that you didn't do or didn't quite get done, and you see what it takes to get your job done well. Because I saw desks that the guy wasn't there the next day because he didn't do the job well. So that made me grow up. And the athletics helped me know the kind of discipline you have to be a team player and at the same time star in your own position.
Okay, so I mean, they're pretty big shoes to fill, working for the White House, working for the president. And then urban planning. I mean, how do you go from, that job to then choose to, or to even know that urban planning was something you wanted to pursue?
That came from my trip to Italy when I was traveling around Europe. One of the guys, I was doing volunteer work, and one of the guys who was in the volunteer corps with me told people in this little village in Italy I could help rebuild their village. And I get to the village, and the people say, Peace Corps, you're here. You're going to help rebuild the village. And what are you talking about, Peace Corps? I don't know anything about Peace Corps.
What village was that?
It's called Villa Minosa in Reggio Emilia.
Okay.
And I get there, and there are a group of Italian older men there, and they could speak a little bit of English. They had all lived in the United States long enough to have Social Security and retired in Italy. And they knew their work, but they'd never supervised anybody. So I became their supervisor. I rebuilt the plaza, rebuilt the school, and so on. I said, hey, I kind of like this work. This is what I'd like to do. What's it called? Well, I had a little bit of background in it from my father. My father worked for the county of San Bernardino, where I came from. And he often talked about how the place was planned and how the buildings were all wrong and this kind of thing. So I said, I'd like to do this. How do you do it? Well, I got back. I went to work for the telephone company, and they sent me to a master's degree program where the professor came over to me and said, would you like to come to UCLA? What for? Well, you could study about the kind of plan. What kind of planning? Tell me about it. Well, one thing led to another. I went to UCLA. I got a full scholarship to study for a doctoral degree in urban planning education. And so I really got into urban planning after that.
Wow. So White House, little Italian town, UCLA, and now Sydney. I mean, where do you think the future of planning in Sydney is? Where do you think it's heading?
Well, I think from that perspective, my perspective of planning was starting right at the bottom, building a little plaza. Mm-hmm. And later on in my career, I started out at the University of Pittsburgh with my doctorate degree after working in the White House. I discovered that the thing you have to do best and understand best is the people in the place before you try to work on the place.
Yeah, reverse engineer it.
Reverse engineering. You discover what are the people about. So I went to small towns and worked in small towns. And I did that when I moved to the University of California. I worked in very small towns trying to understand the people. And from that, I got a lot of recognition because nobody else was going to small towns. And because, again, going back to being an athlete, you can work longer and harder than a whole lot of people, and you understand how to build teams. So I never tried to rebuild a city by myself or a town. I got the whole town involved, just like going back to Italy. Get the whole town involved in making this new segment of the town or the downtown or places for farm workers to live and the like. And so I did that for 30 years. I was at the University of California at Berkeley teaching urban planning with small towns and big cities. But in the big cities, I didn't try to do the whole city. I did neighborhoods. And I started a little consulting and real estate business that did very well on building small shopping centers and small places for people to live. And we learned several things. The Oakland Raiders, we lived in Oakland, the Oakland Raiders football team. Mm-hmm. They moved into one of our buildings.
So you're a Raiders fan?
I'm a Raider, but I didn't play football for them. I played for San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So the Raiders came in, and I'm thinking, boy, I'm chuffed about this. The Raiders are in my building. That lasted 1 month. First, they didn't pay their bills. Second, they knocked holes in the walls. And I said, wait a minute. I think you ought to rent to people who want to live in your building. And you ought to go back to my groundwork. You got to have people with stores that they come to every day, not people who have a lot of discretionary income. So that's what I got into, building decent-sized apartment buildings. We got a lot of good help from the Bank of America, that every time we were successful, they'd come to us and say, we got a building that's failing. Would you like to take it over? So there are 3 of us, and we did this, and I was still teaching at the university, and I could impart real estate education to my urban planning students. And getting to Sydney, that's one thing planning students don't have. They don't have any real estate education. They don't know how much it costs to develop a building. They don't know how much it costs to hold a building. They don't know how much infrastructure is required and where the money comes from for that infrastructure.
Look, I think fundamentally that's the problem with the education system, period, here, is that everybody's got some great tertiary qualifications and they pass their exams and, on that level they get it. But put them in the workplace for 5 minutes and they won't last. So fundamentally, I think that's at some point, if we can somehow champion change in education to become a more experience-based type education system where it's actually on the ground type experience and not just sitting in a university lecture hall and just listening to the lecturer, which is no disrespect to the lecturers and all the professors. I think they've got a lot to teach us, but I think hours on the ground, experience on the job far outweighs the current education system we're dealing with at the moment, because they're coming out and they're really not able to cut it in the workplace, and that's the problem. That's why most of them can't land a job today.
Well, let's go back to this and put it in the urban planning context. When I taught urban planning at the University of California, every student could design at least a precinct. But they didn't start with the design of a precinct like architects do on a piece of paper. We walked those neighborhoods.
Yep.
I asked the students, I'd walk down the street and I asked the students, who lived here? They'd say, they see a few black people, say, black people live here. I say, no, this is a Chinese neighborhood. What do you mean it's a Chinese neighborhood? Do you notice those things on the windows? Do you know how the grass is done here? Oh, yeah, of course. I said, if you can't see it, you can't build it.
You understand its culture and where the culture seeds from.
Seeds from. Because you're building for that culture in that place. And we still have a very successful program. We're ranked number 1 when I was there. I still think we're 1, 2, or 3 in the nation and maybe in the world. Then I went to the University of Southern California, where we had one of the first real estate programs ever in the nation. Rick Pizer, I believe you know Professor Pizer, was my first real estate professor at the University of Southern California.
One of our lecturers at Harvard,
Your lecturer at Harvard. And we were very good mates because we had the same view. You don't learn without experience. But you don't go to experience and then learning, you combine them. And so that has been the way I've led my life. And I think it's a good way. It's not the only way.
So fundamentally, do you think that, from what I'm hearing from you anyway, that the future of Sydney planning, unless we're getting some planners with a lot more experience, we seem to be headed in what direction from your experience?
Well, let's start from the top. And I don't know all the people at the top. We're developing metros.
Yep.
And we're developing light rail systems and so forth. And the first question I have is, who's walked that terrain? Where do these metros connect? When I get off train A, how do I get on train B or bus C? Now, I'm helping to redo the bus system and train system in Santiago, Chile. Last year, we won the UN award for the best urban transportation system because we used that method. I didn't figure out, looking at the plan and so forth, I rode the buses. I sat with the buses, spoke Spanish with the people I speak Spanish. ¿Qué pasa? ¿Dónde vas? Where are you going? And what's going to make a difference in you getting from A to B? Well, the fare, amigo. The bus isn't clean. And the bus, I don't know what time it's going to come. And so we designed this bus system with the people. I see metro systems, nobody's been involved except the engineers. So how do you know this metro system is going to be working well? And this is not a complaint. It's just the way it's done here. When I was in New York, we had 9/11. I was one of the people who helped rebuild. Rudy Giuliani, as a matter of fact, was one of the people I was working for. a name that we don't like to mention too much right now. But he was smart. He went to every funeral. He wanted the city rebuilt around the people. And that's what we really did. So I think where we're going wrong here is if you want the student to really come out in a certain way where they mix experience with education, the people that lead should have that kind of experience. So the leadership needs to be demonstrating every day that it's out with the people. When I was in New Orleans, I would not let the mayor sit in the office. Every day, we got to go in the field. There's some people there. They're hurting. How are we going to help? So I think we got to start leading from the bottom rather than from the top.
Yeah, I mean, at the top, you're getting no stability in the leadership. I mean, before you know it, you get a completely different minister within a very short space of time. The new minister comes in, he's got a completely different direction, he's got a different agenda. You know, he has different aspirations as to where he wants to end up in the ministerial seat, or he may have just other agendas there which aren't necessarily in line with the people's objectives and with planning objectives.
Yeah, and I think let's put it the other way around. Those of you in the development industry might be helping communities shape their destiny rather than putting in housing to see if they want it or like it. And I would like to see more people in the development industry, like the ULI in the United States, that go out and do community charrettes, help people to design their neighborhoods and the like. So when the developer comes, they think, this is the good guy. If you expect the government to be involved in everything, as we do, then you expect them to plan your neighborhood. That's not true where I came from. You plan the neighborhood and then the government comes and does it. That wasn't true in Italy. So in a sense, this is a cultural thing.
So understand the culture
the developers
via understanding the people. Once you understand the culture via the people, get the professionals to then execute what they learn from that culture, and you'll get a better outcome, as opposed to have the government try and plan it for you and stick the community into that.
That's right. That's right. Okay. That's right. I don't know if you've ever been to Dallas, Texas, where I wasn't involved. I was certainly involved in New Orleans, where they've built the most beautiful downtown in that method. They have freeways, which they've built playing fields over the freeway. They have old light rails and things like this that are experienced to ride. They built a cultural center that is interesting. They took a school that was segregated, mostly black, and now it's the school that everybody wants to go to because they learn architecture, design, and planning at that school.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Prof, but I think I remember learning recently that they don't have many controls at all.
None.
So basically there are no controls, and it's basically site-specific every time you do something. So it encourages free form, encourages good design, encourages design excellence, encourages all those things, and allows them to evolve in an amazing way, as opposed to this cookie-cutter approach. That's your setback, that's your height, fit it in a box, that's all that comes, right?
And
that's a problem intrinsically. We've spoken about this a number of times on these episodes, you know, and it seems to be a common theme coming out here. So, you know, maybe we got to take a trip to Houston, you and I, and come back with some ideas.
Well, Dallas more than Houston.
Dallas, sorry, yeah.
But
Texas on it.
But Denver and other cities have community design charrettes. In Portland, there's one every week. A neighborhood where people from all over the city come because they say, well, I might move in that neighborhood, so I want to know how they're trying to design it. You don't start with the controls.
Yeah.
The control, because remember, life is ongoing. If you tried to control your life, if I tried to control your life every minute, what would you be? But if I allowed you to grow and put some seeds in so that you could grow better and smarter, we'd have a better outcome.
Yeah, encourage growth.
Encourage growth, but that requires a different mentality. That requires you not to be afraid of what you will do.
Yeah.
So when I was looking at my grandchildren this morning, one's just barely walking, okay? And she was going to walk into a table. And my first feeling was, I better stop that. But I let her keep going. You know what she did? She put her hands out and stopped the fall. So I let her have that experience. And that's not to say I'm not a controlling grandpa.
So we should tell the planning minister to leave us alone and let us have some experience, right?
Well, I think it'd be kind of interesting if we actually took a community, say this is not yet fully built, say in the hills someplace, brought the people together and the planners and developers and let them plan it.
You know, my one of the previous episodes with Chris Johnson, we put a challenge out to the councils back then during that episode, and unbeknownst to me, a couple of people actually heard that, and one of the councils actually reached out to me and is willing to take up the challenge. And the challenge was that we're going to put the challenge out there to a council that would encourage free forward thinking, that would embrace change, that would encourage change and have this forward thinking mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm going to probably announce that in the next couple of weeks. Maybe do that with you and maybe with Chris. Maybe we'll have a conversation about how that happens. But I really think that once that challenge goes out there, that may set a bit of a precedent or a bit of an example of about how we may be able to improve the way things are being done. Because at the moment, we've got these massive delays in planning, as you and I we talk about on a regular basis, right? So, you know
how long it takes to get an approval in Texas, in most of Texas? 10 days.
Yeah, and we're talking major developments. That's the conversations we were having with Professor Pfizer back then. And he was telling us they're turning around high-rise approvals in 10 days.
If not, it's deemed approved. No one thinks about letting it happen. They think about we're all tied to this destiny, that we're in this together. The building's going to be as tall as it needs to be. No one's afraid of the height. Just what do we need to do if we're going to accommodate this? What do we need to do in this whole precinct to make it a good place to live?
Because work with the solution.
With the solution always comes out of the environment. And I was with some very good architects, Chris Alexander and others, who talk about planning with nature. And so, and I believe in planning with the community. If you combine those two, you'll get good outcomes. Places will be different because they need to be different, but not because of planning control. One of the more desperate things I see here is because of the planning controls, particularly the apartment controls, I don't know how I'd find my house because every one of these apartments looks exactly the same. So I would want to have a couple drinks and go home.
That's the old SEP 65, which is now ADG. And again, another common theme that we seem to talk about, we spoke about that with Chris, is that this cookie cutter approach, while in principle is a great idea, and Chris designed SEP 65, by the way, he wrote that document, it wasn't designed to be the control that controlled everything units or everything apartments. It was
a
trying
guide.
To educate.
It's called guide.
Yeah, a guide. It's trying to educate the people that were less informed about the approach to design, and then somebody grabbed it and made it the Bible almost, right? So
but
this
it's still
is the
called
problem
a guide.
we have.
It's still called a guide.
Yeah, I know that. But they rely on it. So let's move forward on that, Professor. In that, I think what's really important here today is we've got a pretty slow economy right now in definitely in Sydney and New South Wales, and I think Australia-wide is feeling it all. We've got the lowest interest rates ever seen in history, 0.75 as a base interest rate with the Reserve Bank right now, and then we've got these massive delays in planning that are not encouraging any forward movement in the business in the construction and development industry, right? What I want to ask you today is how do you think that these delays in planning are actually affecting the economy itself?
Well, remember, construction alone is about 15 to 20% of our economy. And when it slows down, of course, it has really big ongoing consequences. But it's not the biggest sector. One of the largest sectors is students coming here. When students come here, they got to have a place to live, right? And of course, we have the mining sectors and the like. But the sector that should be the biggest sector in our economy is the knowledge economy. We should be designing and exporting. Look, does it take a ship to move Google's product? No, it takes a millisecond. Does it take a big, organized institution to run Facebook? No, it doesn't. You win with brains in today's world. That's why the competition with the Chinese and others is so important.
Yeah.
Because the old economy, where you either pull something in the ground or build something to cause progress, is gone. And that's my new book about the rising knowledge economy, and how Australia is a small country. We were the leaders in many areas. We were the leaders in the internet. We were the leaders in distance education. We've been the leaders in many medical devices and so on.
So what slowed us down?
The thing that slowed us down was our government says, we're not interested. Go peddle that to the Americans, which we have done. The ATM was invented here because we didn't see these as things. We will invest in a thing, but we will not invest in an idea. Americans are quite the opposite. Americans will invest in an idea that may become a thing, but if it's not a thing, there's no big concern. So my concern about our economy is not whether the building industry is going right. My concern is what is the core economy. And if the core economy is not thinking faster, creating new products and devices, we don't have to make them here. You know, Macintoshes and Apples are not made in the United States. The patent's in the United States. A hamburger for McDonald's is not made in the United States and comes here. But McDonald's has the patent. Almost all of our grocery chains are owned by people in the United States. They own Woolworth, and so they own the IP, so they make the most money. Every time you buy a McDonald's, you're sending 10 or 15 cents to Chicago.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Excuse the pun, yeah. But that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. I can see the way Harvard University and Cambridge and the way Boston is pretty much built around that education hub. It's absolutely phenomenal in that. I think Harvard has the largest endowment fund in the world. $38 billion sitting there, and they don't know what to do with the money or where to invest it, right?
Well, they invested it in me.
Oh, did they? Okay.
And when I was back in the real estate industry,
okay. Yeah.
they invested in one of the projects.
Maybe you can hook me up with them again and see if we can get some money
seriously,
back into Sydney.
Harvard and MIT have investment funds.
Yep.
And they invest in not just every piece of real estate, but they invest in those pieces of real estate where there's going to be a social return as well as an economic return, because they feel they must make the right impact on the world, or they'd be caught in a situation where somebody said, like investing in tobacco or something, you did more harm than good. And they don't hide their investment. It says Harvard investment.
Mm.
So I think we need to invest in ourselves.
Sorry?
We need to learn how to invest in ourselves.
Yeah, look, I agree. So, I mean, like with the state of the economy going backwards, I'm hearing talks of quantitative easing at the moment, the government actually investing money back in. Sorry?
Printing money.
Yeah, look, I mean, what do you think about that?
I'm not that kind of an economist. This is something that has been done clearly. There's a lot of economic theory on this, and the idea of printing money is to stimulate development and to stimulate growth. If you print enough money, people will go out and buy new chairs, new tables, new this, new that, and pretty soon the plants start again, and that's the whole theory.
Well, I think I've got an easier answer. If they just allowed approvals and they actually approve things, you'll get momentum here. The thing is, the development industry is very active here.
But
the people want to get off their hands and actually do something. They're ready, willing, and able. The problem is you can't get anything through. And we've got a problem right now. And, one would think that if you stimulated the economy through supply, because there is no supply, we're running out of supply, that in itself is a better form of quantitative easing rather than actually investing cash that's being printed.
Yeah, but remember, the development industry is an intermediary. The development industry doesn't create wealth. It uses the wealth that is here. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I am concerned about that, but I want new wealth generated. And when we get more people making Googles, like in California, housing prices can go through the roof. I could care less because there are more people having
money.
You're not quantitative easing, you're quantitative creating. It's creating capital that makes the difference.
So I kind of see a bit of a similarity between the way the economy is right now and before the US had that massive correction. Right? I kind of see a very similar thing going on here at the moment. Talk to us about that and whether you see any similarities there.
Well, we missed the last recession, depression, whatever you want to call it. I don't know how we're going to miss the next one. And there are a couple things going against us. One is we're so heavily dependent on the Chinese that if they pull the rug and the U.S. slows down, we don't have another product to offer. The U.S. can come out of this because they have new products to offer. They also have a growing educated population. We don't have those things. We don't have those cards to play. We can't put out the latest new Google. We are not putting out the greatest new name the product or service. So for us to come out of it, we have to depend on somebody else. We were depending on the tigers before. Those economies are flat, the Singapores, Brazil, etc. Mm-hmm. Then we were depending on the Chinese.
Well, they killed that recently.
And that's leveling off. What's the next move? And I want to go back to what I said before. If we're attracting all these students, we ought to start depending on their brains. Rather than sending them out, I want to keep a few more of them here to create the new products and services. That is anathema here. The idea is to give them an education and send them home. But that's like me being a coach saying, I'll coach up all the other guys and then we'll have a competition. Well, I haven't been coaching my team.
Yeah.
So
you definitely need to
competition
invest in the future
day
in the education
comes,
of our children, absolutely.
Well, it's not just in education. I'm talking about, name me the universities we have that are tops in science and technology. You went to one. Okay? Mm-hmm. And there was one down the street. Mm-hmm. And there was one down the road from there. You could walk to all three of them.
Innovation is key in
key.
Boston. Absolutely.
It's key. So what we have to have is an economy that produces. Then we need to have what I talked about earlier, you guys making such innovations in development that the Chinese say, I want to buy that. The Americans say, I want to buy that product. When I thought of building things, I thought of who wants to give me the money to build my next building. And if it's really good, and this neighborhood looks really good, we'll make progress. And we did right up until the recession. We just had more cities coming to us saying, would you build your next project here? We will give you this. We will provide that. So here you are saying, well, I have to sign a BPA for this infrastructure. I was in the position saying, look, we really can't build here unless we have optic. We'll put the optic cable in for you.
Yeah, look, times definitely have changed. We're getting less and less support, and the councils themselves have kind of become profit-making enterprises within themselves, and we're competing with them. Several councils are doing massive developments, and things are working really well for a lot of these councils right now. So we've gone from an era of the councils begging for business and we'll give you all the love and support that you need, to one where they're actually competing with the developer right now, and
they're building houses.
Yeah, I mean they're a massive developer. I'll name several councils that have done some of the largest master plan communities seen in Sydney for a long time. You know, it's massive. They're massive. So
that's
look, that's Sydney, and we all love Sydney, Prof. And you're very well respected and highly regarded globally. The question now begs to ask you, why Sydney? What keeps you here, and why do you love it so much in Sydney?
I came to Sydney for a couple of reasons. One, at the time, I came from the University of Southern California, and we were very big in Asia. So actually, I was shortening my commute.
Okay, it was convenient.
It was very, very convenient. I was anticipating that the rest of my working life would be in Asia. And an English-speaking place in Asia would fit into that scenario very well. Mm-hmm. I've been involved in Asia and in Australia since I've been here. So that was the first reason. The second reason was that I thought the place was relatively underdeveloped. Not undeveloped, but underdeveloped. That would be a place where I could make a new mark for quality development by working with people in the development and the planning industries. And the third reason was I thought this might be the place for the new startups. That we were pretty much tuckered out, as my grandfather would say, in Silicon Valley. There wasn't anything new coming. And if you looked at Australia, from where I was sitting, it was the dream. Great universities, great places to live. That's the formula for a great economy. So I was a Philistine.
If you really wanted to be in Asia and you're looking for that kind of opportunity, I'm going to probably invite you to come with me to Beirut, right? So technically we're part of Asia.
Yeah.
And let me tell you,
true.
that's a bit of a land of opportunity right now. Labor's a hell of a lot cheaper, and I really believe it's a land of opportunity in itself, But we love Sydney. Sydney's a great place. Let's talk legacy. What do you hope your legacy will be?
I think, and this has pluses and minuses to it, I'm going to be known forever for Katrina.
For?
Katrina,
Okay.
New Orleans. In 3 years, we rebuilt a city that's never, ever been done in history. Everywhere, anywhere. It took
everyone had a can-do attitude and was actually doing it, and I'm sure there would have been, much less red tape, and it just made life easy.
No, it was the toughest. Nobody in Washington wanted to help.
Really?
No. It was an all-black city, and they figured good riddance.
So how did you do that?
Through a lot of persistence, through knowing an awful lot of people in Washington and New York and around the world who brought a lot of resources to it, and pretty soon when they were embarrassed, they started helping. But I went to New York City and got the biggest bankers and so on involved in Katrina and the recovery, and went to the White House and the like and got people involved. I got a guy by the name of Barack Obama involved. And he was not president. He was just a senator. I didn't know he was going to be president. As a matter of fact, I thought he might be the vice president at some point. And so it kind of surprised me when he did become president. But he was certainly on my side. So, no, I can't step away from that. It was tough. There are a lot of ugly things said about me and what I had to say about people and things like that in there. Everything I said was accurate. And I was a bit like Trump. I said exactly what I thought, and it was not necessarily politic. But I figured this is my last job. I'm going to have to do what I think, whatever. I mean, so that's certainly my legacy. And I think having the time I had with the Clinton administration, where we did a lot of good things, are legacies. I look at this as my opportunity to look back and work with good people like you so that you can take things forward.
Mate, it's an honor and a pleasure to work with you, let me tell you. I've got to ask you a couple of bits of advice now, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
My 20-year-old self? To look out to being 80 and try to be me.
And then one bit of advice that you would give me for improving the quality of my work-life balance.
Your work-life balance? Gee, Joe, I don't know. I think you seem to do a pretty good job of that already, because you travel, you learn from your travel, you're trying to educate yourself, and you can't be a better father unless you're a better person. So
everything around you.
Everything around you is okay. And I finished my law degree at 80. So my children have never seen me not learning.
Life's all about learning.
Yeah.
Professor Blakely, an absolute privilege and honor to have you join me today on this episode of Developmental. Hopefully I want to do this with you again one more time, and maybe talk about something that might be a bit more closer to your heart. So I'll wait for you to give me a call one day and say, Joe, let's do another episode of Developmental. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks for listening to Developmental, Property and the Mind podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode, available wherever you get your podcasts. Or to talk to Joe, visit trafalgar.com.au. That's TRIFALGA.com.au.